It's almost hard to believe now, really, given how close India and the U.S. are. But things weren't always like this, were they?
No, absolutely not. It's quite surprising, actually. But the U.S. once, well, simulated a pretty major military operation against India.
You're kidding. Seriously, what was going on then?
Okay, so this was back in 1991. A big American defense contractor put together this simulation, the scenario they played out. It was set in the year 2000,
Okay.
and it imagined this severe crisis in Kashmir, pushing India and Pakistan, both nuclear armed by then, right to the edge of war.
Wow. And this is happening just as the Cold War is winding down, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
1991, the Soviet Union dissolves. Suddenly, the U.S. is the only global superpower.
Mm-hmm.
And, the idea of a nuclear war breaking out in South Asia, that was seen as a huge danger to this New World Order they envisioned. Washington was really worried about the India-Pakistan situation.
So, for everyone listening, and maybe especially those of you deep into UPSC prep, understanding these India-US dynamics is obviously key for mains, maybe even prelims too. Our mission here is to really dig into this simulation. We want to get a handle on the thinking behind it, what the attack plan looked like, and crucially, what it tells us about how dramatically the India-US relationship has changed. Our source for this pretty fascinating story is our Asian Times.
Right, so let's dive into the specifics of that 91 simulation. The main thing driving the U.S. scenario, as they saw it, was this fear of nuclear war between India and Pakistan.
Okay, the nuclear angle.
Yes, but beyond the absolute human catastrophe, there was a big economic worry too. India sits right on these vital sea lanes. So any major conflict there could seriously mess with the American economy, global trade, the whole system.
Okay, so what did the actual simulated U.S. action look like? What were the steps?
Well, the simulation started with a massive show of force. The U.S. sends in 2 aircraft carrier battle groups. Yeah, and 2 nuclear-powered attack submarines right into the Indian Ocean.
Just like that.
The immediate idea, supposedly, was deterrence. U.S. intelligence seemed to think India might be planning a preemptive strike on Pakistan's nuclear sites.
That feels like a very, very strong reaction just for deterrence.
Well, and it escalated quickly in the simulation. The U.S. fleet actually sailed into India's declared maritime exclusion zone near Bombay.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And the Indian Navy, in the scenario, responded. They staged mock air attacks on the American ships. Sent a pretty clear message.
And the U.S. response to that?
They basically stood their ground, asserted their right to, quote, peaceful transit. But at the same time, they put their B-52 bombers, the ones stationed in Diego Garcia, on high alert. And this is where it gets really specific. These bombers were given actual target lists inside India.
Wait, actual targets? What kind of targets are we talking about?
Yeah, it was a pretty comprehensive first strike plan. The lot included India's Agni and Prithvi missile sites.
The strategic stuff.
Definitely. Also, the Verapu submarine base, the Vendurthi Naval Air Station, ammo depots, aircraft hangars, even a power plant and military repair shop.
It's incredibly detailed, a huge range of assets. What was the scale of the simulated attack itself?
So the simulation involved B-52s, attack subs, naval destroyers, launching a total of 190 missiles at India.
190?
Yeah. The aim, to completely take out India's command and control, basically cripple any ability to retaliate effectively. The simulation showed the Indian Navy and Air Force just being constantly hammered, unable to function.
And was that it? Or was there more planned?
The simulation even included a second wave. The U.S. held back 117 missiles in reserve.
Just in case.
Presumably, yeah. To deal with anything that survived the first hit, or any surprises.
Okay, let's unpack why this simulation happened. It feels like more than just a standard military exercise.
You're absolutely right. This wasn't just some theoretical war game. It was actually part of a sales pitch.
A sales pitch?
Yeah, by General Dynamics, the huge American arms maker. They were pitching it to the Pentagon.
What were they selling?
They were pushing for the U.S. to buy their next-generation cruise missiles. And a big selling point was that these new missiles had, like, 3 times the range of the Tomahawk.
Which General Dynamics had also been involved with, right?
Exactly. So you see this mixed, genuine feel of nuclear war, yes, but also the business interests of a major defense contractor kind of wrapped up in it.
It's just such a stark contrast to the defense relationship we see now.
That contrast is exactly the point. Back then, 1991, the way the U.S. generally saw India was very different. Often suspicious, sometimes even viewing India as a potential, adversary. Things that India does now routinely, like missile tests, or leasing that Soviet nuclear sub, the INS Chakra. Back then, that caused real concern, even disapproval. in the U.S.
Right. And India wanting a bigger naval presence, too.
Yeah, India's ambitions in the Indian Ocean definitely made Washington uneasy at the time.
It's hard to square that view with today's strategic alignment. I know senior journalist Seema Sirohi talks a lot about this shift in her book, Friends with Benefits, the India-U.S. story, doesn't she?
He absolutely does. Sirohi's work is fantastic for tracking these changes in perception. She even points to this 1990 congressional testimony by a U.S. Air Force Lieutenant General G.L. Butler.
Okay.
And he's listing potential global conflict sources. And worryingly on that list, not just India-Pakistan, but also the rise of new centers of power. And he specifically flagged India's growing influence as a potential danger.
Wow. Hearing India described as a danger back then, it sounds almost jarring now.
It really does. And what's also interesting is that this simulation happened even while there were some sort of initial improvements starting in defense ties under President H.W. Bush.
So even with some positive signs, this undercurrent was still there.
Exactly. And Sirohi reported on this back in March '91 in The Telegraph. The headline was something like, "Top defense firm briefs Pentagon on how to neutralize India." Yeah. Caused huge offense in New Delhi, naturally. India felt like it was being lumped in with, the bad guys, especially when it had a clear no first-use nuclear policy. For UPSC aspirants, again, understanding this history, the mistrust, the different priorities, it's so vital for grasping why today's relationship is so significant.
So what changed? What were the big drivers that took us from, well, simulated attack plans to the close partnership we have today?
A really critical moment was President Obama's 2012 strategic guidance.
Okay, the pivot to Asia.
Precisely. That document marked a major shift in U.S. foreign policy, this strategic pivot or rebalance towards the Asia-Pacific. And in that new picture, India was suddenly identified as a really crucial partner.
A key player.
A key player for regional stability, yeah. And let's be frank, also for counterbalancing China's growing influence.
And the irony here is pretty thick, isn't it? The same company, General Dynamics.
That simulated attacking India is now a major defense supplier to India. It's a perfect illustration of the shift.
Right. They're selling Stryker combat vehicles to the Indian Army now.
Exactly. That deal is expected to be finalized, well, very soon, actually.
Can you give us a few details on the Strykers? Why are they important for India?
Sure. The Stryker, it's an 8-wheeled armored fighting vehicle, originally made for the U.S. Army. It's got a pretty powerful Caterpillar engine, about 350 horsepower.
Okay.
Good range, around 483 kilometers, and it can move fast up to 100 kilometers per hour. Crucially, it uses bolt-on ceramic armor, which offers better protection, including against IEDs.
And logistically.
That's another key point. It's compatible with the Indian Air Force's Chinook helicopters. That means they can be moved around quickly, deployed where needed.
So what's India's plan for using these vehicles? How does it fit strategically?
Well, the Ministry of Defense has this 3-phase plan. First, they're buying a small number directly off the shelf through the U.S. Foreign Military Sales, or FMS program.
Get them in quickly.
Right. Then phase 2 involves joint production here in India.
Sure.
That's a big deal for boosting India's own defense industry, technology transfer, all that.
And long term.
Long term, the idea is that this whole initiative helps pave the way for India to develop its own advanced armored vehicles down the line. Indigenous development.
And where are they actually going to be deployed? Where will we see these Strykers?
The main plan is to deploy them in the high-altitude areas along the border with China.
Ah, okay. Eastern Ladakh, Sikkim.
Exactly. Those areas. They're a really important part of modernizing the Army's infantry combat vehicles, replacing the older BMP-Is. It's about enhancing mobility and firepower in that really tough terrain. Again, for UPSC folks, note the clear strategic positioning here, especially regarding China.
So just to wrap our heads around this journey, we've gone from a scenario where a top U.S. defense firm literally mapped out how to neutralize India to that exact same company providing India with advanced military gear to tackle shared strategic challenges. It's an absolutely incredible turnaround in the relationship.
It truly is. That 1991 simulation versus today's defense deals, they're like bookends showing this massive transformation. What started as suspicion, different goals, it's evolved into this really critical strategic partnership based on, well, converging interests now.
And for you listening, especially if you're studying for the UPSC exams, really think about this history. How might this past, the simulated attack, the deep mistrust, the slow shift, still subtly influence the partnership today? Especially as things heat up geopolitically with China's role, what does it all mean for India's own strategic independence, its autonomy, its future role in the Indo-Pacific? It's definitely not a simple picture.
Absolutely. Knowing this background gives you much richer context for analyzing everything that's happening now and what might happen next in this vital relationship.
Well, we hope this deep dive into, let's face it, pretty unsettling piece of history has given you some valuable insights, particularly for your UPSC prep. If you found this useful, please do hit like, subscribe, and maybe drop a comment if you have more questions. And remember, our source for today's discussion was the Our Asian Times. Thanks for joining us.